to the Next Best Picture podcast, where I am being joined right now by the writer and director for the film Hot Milk, Rebecca Lenkiewicz. Rebecca, thank you so much for joining us here today.
It's a pleasure, absolute pleasure. Really great to be here.
Thank you. Thank you. And it's wonderful to have you here as well. We've been following your career for quite some time now. You've worked in theater, radio, television, film. You've written or co-written some of our favorite films over the last couple of years. With this story in particular, this is based on a 2016 novel by Deborah Levy. And I'm curious to know for you, what was the hook for this? Was it the premise, the characters, the themes it was touching upon? What made this one say to you, I must adapt this for the screen?
I think it was a mixture of all of those things. Absolutely, the fact that three females lead the action was strong in my desire to direct it. And when I read it, it was simply to adapt it. But as I kept reading, I sort of felt the details and I was kind of in it. And I started to feel very territorial about it. And I thought, I don't actually want to give this one away. Particularly because, you know, with the intimacy in it, I felt like it could be very subtle and sensual and beautiful. And I didn't want it to be crass in any way. And I could see, you know, the actors who could play these parts. So I just kind of, I went for it and said, you know, I will adapt, but only if I can direct. And it was the themes. I felt like I had a lot to give to the film. You know, it resonated with incidents in my life. It resonated almost with the three different generations that I have been, you know, because there's, you know, a woman in her 20s, woman in her 30s, woman in her 60s. You know, it's kind of like I felt like I could be all three.
Got it. Yeah, no, it's interesting in that regard too, then, because then it invites you to be able to have relatable perspectives with all three. And thus, like you said, if you know the characters that well and that deeply, it must make the casting process pretty much a cinch then.
Oh, the casting process was dreamy. You know,
Mm,
Fiona Shaw came straight on board, and that was amazing because it's so hard to make an independent film these days. And I
yeah.
just kept thinking, Fiona's with us, you know, we'll get this made. So she was kind of like our rock from the beginning. And then Vicky Creeps was another dream, and she just got on the phone and said, yes, I love it. We'd never met, you know, so it was very simple and beautiful and inspired a lot of faith towards the film, you know, the more people who came on board. And then we had COVID, so that was a hiccup.
Oh,
Yeah, but then pretty soon Emma Mackey came on board, you know, so it was kind of like, you know, as well as the rest of the cast who are incredible, you know, so we were really blessed. Yeah.
so how long has this been in development for? You said COVID, so we're going back 5 years at least.
I think the first conversation was 7 years ago,
Mm.
and we shot it 2 years ago, you know, so yeah, yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So you were mentioning before too about how there were certain things that you could draw upon here with each character. Specifically, have you known anyone that has had to be a caregiver, or have yourself in your situation? Like, because that element of the film specifically, I mean, I know from speaking with people in my own life, it weighs upon people, even though you mean well at first. You know, not to get too personal, but like we lost my grandmother a year ago, and in the last year of her life, my family had to like have like pretty much move into her home and take care of her to the point that even my mother was like, I love her dearly. I want to have her live long, but this is a lot.
Yeah, it is a lot. And, you know, I'm in my 50s and I've seen it happen, you know, within my family. I've seen it happen with friends. And the idea that, you know, Sophia is a caregiver since she's 4 years old, really, you know, her mother hasn't
Yeah.
moved. And yeah, I mean, I had very complicated relationships within my family that I think are echoed with Rose and Sophia. There's a certain narcissism that I've encountered that just makes life difficult, you know,
Mm,
and you want to love someone, but they barricade. It's almost like a sabotaging your attempt to love them, you know. So I
yeah.
think that that's an interesting dynamic where someone's aching to be loved, but they are their own worst enemy because they push you away and yet ask you not to go away and control
Yeah.
you, you know. So I think codependency is quite an interesting subject, and I have yeah, I have been subject to that, and I think that even when people haven't been subject to it in extremis, they can always
Mhm.
relate to it in some way, either in the family or with a lover or at work. We're all kind of all got satellites around us, and it's just the temperature that it happens at is extreme in this case.
Yeah, totally. So I understand you shot this in Greece.
We did.
Okay. Tell me about passing Greece off as Spain in this case. How does that work?
We did try to shoot it in Spain. We went to Almeria and did all our research. And the Spanish teams were brilliant, but it was just the numbers, because we had a low budget and Greece had a great tax credit. And so we went to Greece and we had a fantastic production company, Heretic. And we had a brilliant production designer, Andrei Ponkratov, who made our Greek slice of life into Spanish, and he made a beautiful jellyfish hut that was a prototype from Almeria. And, so we kind of tried to cast also people who look more Spanish than Greek. And we haven't yet had anyone, outraged of Barcelona about the film yet, because also I think it's not particularly urban. So nobody's in a big argument about that street doesn't exist or that's not the style of our town hall. It's almost like a limbo land anyway, but we did paint out some Spanish flags or Greek flags and put in Spanish, yeah. But it
Yeah.
was a joy and Greece was a joy. Very hot,
Well,
45 degrees sometimes.
I was gonna say I can't imagine like what it must have been like because you have so many exteriors in this
Oh,
that it must have been scorching. I mean, it fits the film. Simmering tensions, boiling underneath the surface between these characters, exasperated by the heat of the climate that they're inhabiting. I mean, I'm sure it was great for them.
was great, but it was hard for the crew, and there were strong
Hmm.
winds sometimes, and I loved the wind on screen, but it was hard for people, and some of our locations burnt down. There were
Oh,
wildfires, so we were kind of going out to new locations that we were just deciding upon on the day, but it was just a wonderful team effort. Everyone was just there. Our cinematographer Christopher Blaufelt would run towards the distance, saying we've got to catch the sun. It was deeply romantic and deeply hard work.
I can imagine. I can only imagine.
But the joy
Um,
was we could jump into the sea at lunchtime. You
oh,
know,
that's lovely.
yeah,
Yes, that's a good point. I like
yeah.
that.
Lots of people would dive in, apart from the cast who were made up. So they just had to stay in the trailers.
I want to try to avoid spoilers as much as I possibly can here. Can you tell me about the images over the end credits and help me understand how you arrived at doing that? Because obviously, it's a lasting image that you want to leave the audience with. And like I said, I don't want to give away too much, but can you just walk me through that process of how you arrived there?
Arriving at the end, we had a different script originally, a softer version. And in,
Mm.
and in the edit, we had a softer version of the film. And finally, I just sort of thought, no, we have to go darker. And we
Why
did.
was that?
It just felt like everyone had fought so hard within it that I kind of just wanted it there to be something open at the end of like, does she, doesn't she?
Yeah.
Um, and it just felt like I wanted it to go back into the mind of the audience rather than just show them, exactly what happens. So it's
Hmm.
almost like a personality test at the end. Um, and I love how it ends, but it makes some people quite angry. And I think that's fine. Some people love it and say, I loved inhabiting that space of silence and darkness for a while. And other people say, how could you do that? And then over the credits at the end, there's a ritual of women dancing, and I just thought that kind of echoes everything that's in the film, and also Sophia as an anthropologist. These women are kind of stabbing themselves with this kris, and they're kind of high on the fumes of leaves, and I just thought that was a rather beautiful metaphor for the whole of the film, really, that we just endure and try.
Yeah. And also too seeking some form of liberation as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, and
And that
also
can
very strong, brilliant, beautiful women in those archive images at the end. Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you there. Um, as I was mentioning earlier, you've worked in radio, television, film, pretty much every form of writing that this industry can offer you. What would you say is the both limitations, but also freedoms that film writing offers you?
Um, well, I'd say the limitations uh, are that sometimes you'll give a script and it is just thrown around, and what you've given in is quite different to the end result if somebody feels
Mm,
quite differently, who's directing it, uh, and that can be quite a challenge, just to sort of let go of scenes that you think are kind of very
right.
keen, but somebody else thinks, no, actually that's sentimental.
And I imagine as a director, you yourself have had times where you're like in the editing and you're like, I got to cut my darlings here. It doesn't work for the film. So like, I imagine you can relate on that level too.
Yeah, I absolutely can, and the film becomes something else in the edit. It has its
Mm,
own tone, it has its own life, and you just have to sort of almost feed that monster, and kind of go, okay, what do you want? You want this fast, you want this slow. It's almost like having a creature in the edit, whereas the script is a much more civilized thing. It's kind of there, it's paper, it's there for you, but in the edit it's like these, everyone has intervened in a beautiful kind of chaos, so you're just waiting to see what comes out. It's a birth thing.
hmm.
But yeah, I mean, the limitations, it's also frustrating when something doesn't get made, just
Yeah.
because you put a lot of heart and soul, or if somebody suddenly decides that you're not the person to tell that story after a few years, that's a limitation. You're kind of like,
Yeah.
these people are inside me, I love these people, and you're saying, they're not me anymore. So it can be frustrating, but counter to that are the joys, which, in my case, I've worked with incredible directors and incredible actors, and they just elevate what you've written into, something very beautiful at the
Yeah.
best of times.
And this is your feature directorial debut,
Yeah.
but you've directed before,
No,
obvious. Wait, no?
no,
I
no,
thought you had really. Oh, so
no.
this is exclusively like for film everything, first
Yeah,
time directing.
yeah.
Okay, now all right, that changes the question ever so slightly. My ultimate question then, moving away from writing, then is what did you think was going to be turned out to be easy that you thought was going to be difficult?
I think what I thought was going to be difficult was the whole thing of directing. And I
Mm,
thought that it would feel like I had the world on my shoulders every day, and that I'd have to be incredibly on and confident and inspire everyone every second. And actually, once you get on set, you just realize that everyone is so brilliant and is giving you energy that it's just this kind of synergy, rather than, you standing alone, with furrowed head. It's just this wonderful team just getting something made. So that was the joy. I knew it would be collaborative, but I was really surprised just at the extent of just how wonderful that was and how open. Difficult. I mean, this sounds, quite pedestrian, but I don't think I'll ever write a car scene again. It was just the technique of like being behind in another car and listening and this and that. And to me in the writing of it, I'm just like, they're in a car, they do this, and I think
yeah,
that's
yeah,
really
yeah.
simple. But the technicality of it, I just kept saying, never, never, never a car again. I'm sure I will. But it was that was the one that kind of left me quite, and anything more that was difficult was simply the setups.
Mm,
It was kind of a lot of setting up, and I didn't understand for a while that you just have to build, the set up for this playground for the actors to play in. And I was kind of thinking, okay, it's set up now. We've got to do it quickly. We've got to keep on time. We've got to do everything. And my our brilliant cinematographer Christopher Blaufeld said, this is made for you. Play in it. Take some time. So it was kind of like just relaxing into the fact that you can take time. It's not time equals money. Move on, move on. It's
right.
get the right shot. Because if you don't get the right shot now, you'll never get it. So it was kind of just learning the rhythms, really.
Hmm.
Trying to sort of attune to when you need to travel quickly and when you need to slow down a bit and just give everyone space and time and hold that space for them.
So would you come to set with a shot list in your mind of how you wanted to achieve it, or would you get to set and look at the space and go, okay, now I know what I want to do based on what we have here?
We did, myself and Christopher built up a big folder of like each
Hmm.
shot and how it would be and whether it's mid distance and what's the expression here. And we had a lot of visual references. So we had a kind of, encyclopedia of this is what we're going to do. But then when we arrived, sometimes that would shift or change, or actors would have different ideas. So we would, adapt to that. So it wasn't kind of like dot to dot, absolutely follow it. But we had a pretty thorough preparation for how we wanted it and how we wanted it tonally, and bodies
Yeah.
in space and compositions. So then, sometimes Christopher would go beautifully off piste and just, take some exteriors or people's hands. And actually, that became a really beautiful language within the film. So, it was a mix of prepared stuff and then just improvising.
If I list off your credits for our listeners who don't already know, from Ida to Disobedience, Colette, She Said, now with Hot Milk, I know that just even saying those titles will get my audience excited to hear what it is that you have coming up next, whether it's directing or writing, because you have such a stellar career. And like I said, those are just the films. I
Yeah.
haven't even touched upon, your work on Small Axe, The Eddie, everything else that you've done in your career as well. So when you look ahead to the future, does it look like it's more directing, or do you have something else already lined up that's, something else?
Hope there'll be more directing. I would love to write an original story and do
Hmm.
that. At the moment, I'm doing rewrites on a play actually with Ray Fiennes. He asked me to write a play, so he's the lead in it with three women, and that will be on in October. And so that's been exciting, and lovely to write a play with, who when who's going to be in it. So that's been beautiful, and I love theatre, so it's been great to get back to that. Um, but generally, I never had a plan, and I don't really
Hmm.
have a plan. But more and more as the years go by, I see time, differently, and I just want to work with people who I trust and love. Um, the business and the industry can be quite stressful, and even working with, people you love and trust can be stressful. But I just want to kind of have an environment where it's incredibly creative, even if that means kind of like very small scale productions or whatever. It's just about, making the next couple of decades really beautiful, you know, um, difficult but beautiful. That's what I'd like.
Well, hey, look at it from this perspective. You can write all the non-car scenes that you want in your next directorial feature. So there is some advantages to writing your own original story in that particular case. So we'll see.
Yeah, I think I'll have an avant-garde, a car goes around the corner, people talk in a car. I'll just have cards for it, and people will see a whole new style of, locomotion.
I love it. Well, Rebecca, thank you so much for your time here. Really, really appreciate it. And I hope everyone who is a fan of your work or is maybe just discovering your work, whatever the case might be, does indeed check out Hot Milk when it releases. So
Thank
thanks once
you.
again.
Thanks so much for your time. It's been brilliant talking.
Take care.
Thank you.